G'day guys, and today we're going to be having a look at transgender athletes, specifically what happens when a biological male who chooses to express themselves as a female, they take on a different name, they perhaps act in a different way, that sort of thing. What happens when this biological male ends up competing against a biological female? Well, obviously, anyone who goes to the gym or has a basic regard for the differences between men and women, what happens is that the biological male crushes the biological female. That's just the way things are. The way evolution has worked with humans is that men were the primary hunter-gatherers. They were the ones who had to go out and be more athletic in that regard. Now, that isn't, of course, to say that women can't be athletic. You're stupid if you believe that, and you're stupid if you bring up stuff like that. But there are very, very few sports where women have a natural advantage to men. The only ones that I'm aware of are competitive shooting, horseback riding, and ultra long distance running. And there may be some characteristics of women that play into that sort of thing. The female body size being smaller and more lightweight could lend itself to horseback riding. That would be one thing that I would guess. So of course what happens is that transgender athletes crush their female competition, and we're having a look in specific regard to this weightlifting event that happened a couple of years ago in Australia. A transgender athlete's recent domination over female competitors in an Australian weightlifting event has sparked a national debate on fairness. So Laurel Hubbard, 39 years old, cruised to victory on Sunday at the Australian International in Melbourne, a key step in representing New Zealand at the 2017 Commonwealth Games. So athletes say that Hubbard, previously known as the male weightlifter Gavin Hubbard, is at an unfair advantage, even if the International Olympic Committee says otherwise. So a Sydney station has noted on Monday that Tracy Lumbrex, who previously won a bronze medal at the Commonwealth Games, dropped to a lower weight class in order to avoid this situation. And I can totally sympathise with that sort of thing. If you've ever spoken to a professional athlete, or someone who at least attempted to become a professional athlete, the regime and the journey to getting towards that goal, to getting somewhere you can win a medal, is frankly insane. I was speaking a few years ago, or a woman was speaking to a group of people, I should say. She was a field hockey competitive field hockey player for Australia, I should say. She was going to compete in the Olympics and that sort of thing, and she described sort of her journey within that, and it sounded like hell. It sounded like hell. The training regime, constantly being pulled out of school. She was going through the latter stages of high school at the time and attempting to balance high school, some form of social life, with this incredibly intense and all-consuming training regime. It sounded like a juggle that she just wasn't capable of, and she was dealing with injuries, she was dealing with pressure from the coaches who were telling her she wasn't fit enough, she wasn't good enough. And to go through all of that, to complete that absolute struggle of a journey just to get beaten out by someone who's wearing a dress and pretending to be a woman, that's horrible. So I can absolutely understand why this Tracy dropped into a lower weight class. Like, why would you want to go through all that effort, all that teeth pulling of becoming a champion weightlifter just to get smashed like that? That sucks. I have to admit that sucks. And as we can see, Hubbard lifted a combined total of almost 591 pounds, beating up his closest runner-up by almost 45 pounds. That's not a real squeaker of a competition. That's a clear victory in my mind. So sports writer Phil Gifford told the Sydney station that complaints about the outcome are moot, since transgender athletes are tested prior to competition. It's testosterone levels that matter, which is a much more scientific way of measuring male gender, female gender, than anything else that is currently known, Mr. Gifford said. And Lauren has passed all those tests over the last 12 months. So what exactly are those tests that they're referring to? Well, if I just jump over to another article here, we can see, this is in regards to Cycling Australia, we can have a look at the International Olympic Committee standards. So there's a bit of a problem. There's a bit of an inequality, I should say. It's kind of funny, actually. So biological women can compete as men without restriction, but biological men wishing to compete as women must meet the following criteria. So let it be known that even if you transition from a man to a woman, you will still have male privilege and have to jump over several hoops before you're allowed to compete. So, for a biological man wishing to compete as women, they must meet the following criteria. The athlete has declared that their gender identity is female. The declaration cannot be changed for sporting purposes for a minimum of 4 years. So you can't just, right before the competition decide that you're a woman and go in and beat everyone like that. The athlete must demonstrate that her total testosterone level in serum has been below 10 nanomoles per litre for at least 12 months prior to her first competition. The athlete's total testosterone level in serum must remain below 10 nanomoles per litre throughout the period of designed eligibility to compete in the female category. So I guess I would say that means, say it's the Olympics, you got to be there for a couple of weeks, your testosterone level must remain below 10 nanomoles per litre for that whole 3 weeks. You can't just, do the 12 months prior beforehand and then start ignoring it afterwards. Compliance with these conditions may be monitored by random or for cause testing. In the event of non-compliance, the athlete's eligibility for female competition will be suspended for 12 months. So they're basically just treating it like someone's juicing. They'll randomly test you, and if you're over, well, you're cheating, and they'll kick you out for that sort of thing. So that sounds promising on paper. They're attempting to level the playing field by reducing the amount of testosterone in biological men wishing to compete as women. But there is a problem with this. There have been 2 large studies in Russia and South Korea measuring the level of testosterone in elite female athletes. And they found that these elite female athletes had testosterone levels between 0.1 and 3.08 nanomoles per litre, and that 99% of female athletes had testosterones below this higher amount, this 3.8 nanomoles per litre. So what they are arguing is that the 10 nanomoles per litre, which is 3 times as much, that 10 nanomole per litre cap is far too generous. And as we all probably know, this is very relevant in athletic competition because testosterone has been linked with increased muscle mass, increased bone mass, and increased competitive drive. What it does, it essentially makes you more willing to take risks. So, you'll be more willing to push yourself. As we all probably know as well, males produce more testosterone than females, with males producing roughly 35 nanomoles per litre, and most women producing less than 3 nanomoles per litre. So it seems kind of ridiculous to me to say, okay, so we have these biological men competing as women, but what we're going to do is we're going to put a cap on their acceptable testosterone levels in an attempt to level the playing field. But the problem is we're going to put that cap at 3 times what most women have. Only 1 percentile of women have testosterone levels above 3 nanomoles per litre, but we're going to put the cap at 10 nanomoles per litre. That's just ridiculous to me. How is this fair at all, even with this, bullshit arbitrary cap that they have? Well, the simple answer, the correct answer, is that it's not fair at all. It's absolutely not fair to expect women, biological women, to be able to compete against biological men. That is simply not what they've been evolutionarily selected for. Whereas men have been evolutionarily selected for athleticism, for hunting, for competition, for warfare, and that sort of thing. And not only is it wrong, is it unfair, is it inequitable, it's also incredibly dangerous. Some of you may be familiar with the MMA fighter Fallon Fox. Now Fox transitioned from a male to a female at age 31, and when he jumped in the ring against a female opponent, he gave her a concussion, 7 head staples, and an orbital bone fracture. This isn't the result of a better training regime, a better diet, a better coach, a better fighting style or anything like that. It just comes down to the biological reality that Fox was a male and his opponent, her opponent, was a female. These are just the way the facts are. Men on average, as I've already discussed, have a higher level of testosterone than women. They also have a greater amount of hemoglobin in their blood. In addition to this, they have a greater total blood volume than women. What this essentially means is that men are more effective at transporting oxygen around their body. And that's incredibly important because we all know that muscles require oxygen to operate. So the female heart is less effective at pumping blood and muscles and is slower to extract oxygen from that blood. Now, that's not a problem. That's not a choice that they made. You can't blame them for that. But it's just the way things are, and if you expect men to be able to compete with women fairly, it's just not going to happen. And because these traits are directly linked to aerobic fitness and muscular endurance, the biological differences between the sexes in regards to athletic performance cannot be ignored. When you transition from a man to a woman, it doesn't actually change anything on the biological level. You can do the hormone replacement therapy and you can attempt to change it in that regard, and over time that can happen. I've read that if you do the androgen replacement therapy, within 15 years your bone density will start to slide away, but that does take a very long time. But it also doesn't get rid of the entire past history in regards to your physiology. When Falone Fox transitions at age 31, he can't just snap his fingers and remove all the advantages, or the biological inherent advantages in regards to athletic performance that he has received over the 30-year span of his, quote, maleness. I'll finish off with the closing paragraph from the Spectator article, which I've linked below. To assert that men who transition to women have no competitive advantage is simply delusional and denigrating to the achievements of real women. Not only does it undermine decades of scientific research, it has also made a complete mockery of the idea of fair athletic competition. Transgender participation in female sport is not imposed due to intolerance of transgender people. It is not about targeted harassment, it is not about hatred, and it is certainly not about discrimination. The self-declared rights of transgender athletes to demand inclusion should never usurp the right of women to safely and fairly compete against other women. I think that sums it up rather nicely. If you have anything to contribute to this conversation, anything that I might have overlooked, or another article that you'd like me to look at, please leave it down in the comments below and I'll be sure to check it out. And as always, thanks all for sticking around, and have a good one.